Monday was a day of deadly violence in Sri Lanka. People today woke up to damaged buildings, burnt buses and thousands of troops on the streets. The economic and political crisis has transformed into violent clashes on the ground. At least 7 people have lost their lives in the deadliest clashes since the protest started. Our correspondent Dasuni Otoda was out on the streets of the capital. This is what she saw.
I am here in Colombo mere 24 hours after the violent clashes that transpired yesterday. And as you can see right behind me are buses that have been completely vandalized by these protesters following yesterday's violent clash. That's not all. On the other side as well, you will be able to see a bus that has been completely set ablaze by these protesters. Now, this is not the only location that has buses or vehicles that have been completely set ablaze or vandalized by these protesters. Multiple locations around Colombo right now show similar scenes of vehicles that have been completely vandalized by these protesters. It must be noted that yesterday, after weeks of peaceful protests, was the first time that Sri Lanka saw full-blown violence during protests, more specifically when pro-government protesters clashed with anti-government protesters.
Monday's violence was a turning point for the country. As the outrage soared, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa stepped down, but even that was not enough to pacify the people and calm down the public anger. People wanted the Rajapaksas out, and they refused to back down until their demands were met. Today, anti-government protesters returned to the streets, defying an island-wide curfew.
In line with the strike action called by the trade unions of our country, we strongly condemn the brutal attack carried out by Gotabaya and Mahinda Rajapaksa on the protesters at Galle Face. There are protests across the country today, such as this one.
3 of the former Prime Minister's residences were attacked. Mahinda Rajapaksa even had to be evacuated out of his residence. This was after protesters breached the main gate. He was then flown to an undisclosed location in a pre-dawn operation by the army. An Air Force helicopter was seen taking off from the police park grounds in the morning. It was allegedly carrying some other members of the Rajapaksa family. Now, this comes as his son says Mahinda Rajapaksa will not flee the country. Namal Rajapaksa says the family has no plans to leave the country, adding that Mahinda Rajapaksa would not step down as a lawmaker and would want to play an active role in choosing his successor. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa also appealed to the people to stay calm and stop all acts of violence. The president has already declared a state of emergency in the country. Sri Lanka's defense ministry has now issued shoot-at-sight orders for anyone involved in looting or damaging property. The military and the police also have broad powers to detain and question people without arrest warrants. Now, this comes as both the police and the Human Rights Commission are separately investigating the violence. Authorities could be seen collecting evidence on the streets. Our correspondent was at the spot. Take a look.
Exactly 24 hours since tensions flared at this very specific site, which is one of the entrances leading to the temple trees, which was housing former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. Investigative officials are now on site collecting evidence as investigations are now underway to understand what exactly transpired yesterday for protests which have been happening for weeks on end, that have been peaceful, to suddenly turn violent yesterday as pro-government protesters clashed with anti-government protesters. Sri Lanka's political crisis is worsening just as much as its economic crisis as we speak. Stay with WION as we bring you the very latest here on ground. Reporting from Colombo, I'm Dasuni Otoda.
Now, the opposition parties are calling for Mahinda Rajapaksa to be arrested. They blame him for inciting the violence against the peaceful anti-government protesters.
Everyone who is involved in this government, including President Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Rajapaksa, must be held responsible for this inhumane attack. This was a planned attack. This was a thought-out project. This was an act of state terrorism and political terrorism. The Rajapaksas must be held responsible for this.
The United Nations has also condemned the violence in the country, calling on the authorities to prevent any further unrest.
The High Commissioner said she was deeply troubled by the escalation of violence in Sri Lanka after supporters of the Prime Minister attacked peaceful protesters in Colombo yesterday, the 9th of May, and the subsequent mob violence against members of the ruling party.
Sri Lanka is currently reeling under its worst economic crisis since its independence. The country has suffered months of blackouts and dire shortages of food and fuel. This has triggered massive anti-government protests across the country. And with us on the broadcast is Javed Yusuf. He is an attorney at law of the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka and also the former Sri Lankan ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Javed, thanks very much for being here with us. The situation, unfortunately, has been going out of hand. If you can give us a better sense of what things are looking like as of now.
Yes, I think we all agreed that what happened last night was very unfortunate because the protesters at Golface Green, who have been demanding the resignation of the president, have gone on for 30 days without any violence by peaceful means, as have been protests in the rest of the country. But yesterday, after a meeting with the Prime Minister, supporters of the Prime Minister moved to Golface Green and launched an attack on those people who were in protest. What is puzzling is that these protesters or these people who supporters of Mahinda Rajapaksa who reached Golface had to go past a Kolpiti police station through a high security zone, and they were not prevented from entering Golface. So unfortunately, they really ransacked Golface Green, and this has sparked off a train of violence all over the country. This, as you know, has been a very angry country. People are very angry, frustrated, and deeply disappointed about the failure of the government to ensure supplies of essential goods. Now, as a result of the violence which has gone out of control, even several lawmakers belonging to the government have had their houses attacked, and there have been reports of deaths as well. Now, the government has to immediately bring to under control this violence, because otherwise we can make a bad situation worse.
Indeed, and unfortunately, people are taking matters into their own hands at this point. Now, the police and the Human Rights Commission, we understand, are separately investigating the violence. The authorities could be seen collecting evidence on the streets as well. If you can help us better understand the process that will be followed.
Yes, now the Human Rights Commission has been actually acting proactively and doing a marvelous job, exercising its powers independent of the government. So everybody is waiting to see what the Human Rights Commission investigations unveil. As far as the police are concerned, unfortunately, they are tainted with allegations of being biased towards the government, as well as not taking necessary action to prevent the carnage that took place yesterday, both at Golface as well as to the rest of the country, because we have been sitting on a very tense situation where anything can spark off. So one would have expected the law enforcement agencies to be ready for any eventuality, to prevent any violence, to prevent even a sporadic incident of violence spreading. But unfortunately, they have failed in that task. So we hope that the police investigation will do something good rather than what they have been doing in the past.
Javed Yusuf, appreciate very much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing those perspectives and helping us better understand what things are looking like on the ground. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.